Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Secrets of Flow, or rather these 2 weeks Secrets of Flow because I had to move last week's appearance to this Friday. I'm Alexei Zheglov, speaking from my place in the city of Toronto, the province of Ontario, the country of Canada. And I'm thankful to everyone watching this, whether it's live or on a recording, and whether you watch it in full or just simply skip to any part of this video. So today, the topic will be dependencies in general. By popular demand, I asked around, some people wrote to me with some suggestions about topics to cover on the upcoming episodes of Secrets of Flow, and dependencies definitely came up. So that, and then another request was that also was a bit unexpected to me, was about experience that a lot of people involved in managing work in today's today's high-tech companies is that you play some kind of flow simulation game in training, or maybe you go to a professional meetup where people play that kind of game, and you kind of get the concept, but then you have difficulty applying that in practice. And from my experience, there is something that could be classified as a dependency that gets in the way of practical application. So there is a connection to the topic of dependencies again. Alright, dependencies is a huge topic, really. And sometimes people use the word casually without really clarifying what kind of dependency they mean, and sometimes that leads to some miscommunication that happens in, let's say, the professional community, let's say when different practitioners, such as managers of some project or product or service, talk to each other and share their experiences, or sometimes, their coaches or consultants or trainers discuss this at their level at some conference, or perhaps you can sense it in, let's say, watching a webinar or listening to a case study presentation that someone uses the word dependency and kind of means not what you thought it meant, or means something else to the speaker than it means to you. So dependency always involves two things. Something depends on something else. What depends on what, and there are different kinds of what, and so there are different kinds of dependencies. A lot of possible combinations. But today, rather than giving a complete breakdown of this big topic, I just want to talk about a couple of practical situations which I feel are underrepresented in the kind of conversations among practitioners and among their coaches and expert advisors. So let's begin. One particular type of situation I have in mind. So I'm going to just switch to Miro and try to show what I mean by this. So let's say we have some kind of hierarchical breakdown of work, and I just made up this diagram very quickly just to show perhaps a very simple, actually much simplified than what these things look like in the real world, but you get the concept. There's some very large work item, and I displayed it in the red in this diagram, that you want to complete, and it's going to take some time. And then you break it down into, let's say, smaller pieces, which I visualized here in green color. And those green work items can break down further into some blue tasks that perhaps take even less time, so they're kind of more manageable. And so you basically want these blue tasks to flow somehow, and when they're done, you can roll up your done status to, let's say, green work items, and ultimately to the red work items. Well, to the red work item, and of course there could be many more work items, many levels, but I didn't go very far in my effort to draw this kind of diagram. And what often happens here is this realization that you cannot do work on all these blue tasks in any order. They kind of depend on each other, and it can be quite a complicated web of dependencies. So what do we do? Okay, some of you listening to this, and I know who you are, at least some of you, who are really experienced and knowledgeable, it may be a bit boring for you to wait for my full explanation of this. So I'm just gonna show you a couple of photographs. They're taking off flip charts that I drew some time ago, that really kind of turn this problem around such that everything becomes very simple. And just simply by the geometry of those drawings, you will be able to tell what I mean by this and how I'm gonna make it happen. So, let's see. So here's the first image, and here we have a sketch of a very simple personal Kanban board, ready, doing, done. There are 3 tasks in the backlog, and task X depends on task Y, depends on task Z. So when we pull these tasks into the doing column, we have to be careful to pull them in this particular order and not try to do tasks Y or Z first without, let's say, doing task X first. And then they will eventually be done. Well, actually, what we need to see in our visual management system isn't that, but it's what I'm showing kind of in the bottom part of the picture right now. And there is something here noted with the letter F, which doesn't occur in the upper diagram of a personal Kanban board at all. So F here is some kind of customer recognizable work item or deliverable. It could be a feature in your product or a system that you're building as a project, or perhaps some result of your service delivery that the customer can actually receive and appreciate. And in the process of delivering this customer recognizable thing, you have to go through activities Z, Y, and X in that particular order. And those activities are visualized as columns on a Kanban board. What's interesting is no cards for X, Y, and Z. There's just one card for F, which makes everything kind of simpler. So, but let's carefully walk through this sort of transformation of tasks, work items, and whatnot. So I took a bunch of blue tasks that we created as a result of some kind of work breakdown. This is what they look like. You can just basically put this into your Kanban board's backlog. But then you realize, okay, well, there's actually a lot of dependencies between them, and okay, well, how do I entangle this web? Now, mind you, I just, made up this diagram of, about 15 blue tasks, blue boxes on this diagram, and they drew some random arrows around them. And now, in reality, you may be looking at hundreds of these things with thousands of arrows between them. What do you do then? How do you deal with those dependencies? How do you make it flow? Well, I already gave you a hint how this might work, and what I find when I look at, let's say, how people present about Kanban, let's say at conferences, at local professional meetups, it's like it's almost a given that you have some kind of board and you know already what the work item represents and whatnot, and then people go back to work and they create a very deep hierarchy of work items, and there are some tasks in that hierarchy of work items that are basically, okay, well, I have to set up a test environment so that we test some new feature in our product. So, and then there is a ticket for that, and there are literally hundreds of tickets like that. And what these tickets truly represent, if we look at it from a customer's point of view, they represent some kind of activity in flow. They don't actually represent a work item that you deliver to a customer. And so, looking at various work management systems at various companies that I engaged with in the last several years, I often find a lot of such tasks managed in, just these giant visual work management systems, except they aren't really visual anymore because you just have to scroll multiple screens to see even a relatively compact set of work items. So what we can do to simplify this is just basically look for patterns that a lot of technological work, a lot of creative intellectual work often involves some activities that are investigative in nature, some development of a solution, some validation of the solution, which could be user acceptance testing, testing in various environments with different groups of users, so that we can actually validate and ultimately deliver the solution. So there is really no need to create a separate item for these. These could be represented by the geometry of the board. Also, in order to do some work consistently and attain consistent quality of it, we may need certain agreements with our team, such as, for example, if we completed, let's say, development of some software code, do we have to do some kind of reviews? Do we have to update some documentation? Do we have to update some let's say, build or deployment scripts? Yes. Well, if so, let's have it as a very explicit policy on our team. And that basically means a lot of tasks, such as review this and update that. They basically become simply kind of checklist items on our explicit policy that, we agree with our team that we're just simply going to do them every time we produce a work item of this type for our customers. And so instead of tracking this very complicated web of dependent tasks, which is basically take a work item and it moves to one activity, and the definition of done for this activity involves several checklist items, and there's no need to create any cards for them either. And then we move to the next activity for which we don't need to create any cards, and that involves a checklist of things that we need to do, and there's no need to create task cards for those. And then the item moves to yet another activity, and whatever the number of activities we have, until it's done and delivered to customers. And so, folks, what I just spent about 15 minutes talking about should seem very simple, and yet when I look at the actual contents of work management systems at companies, I find a lot of things that are represented with rectangular cards moving on visual so-called flow boards, Kanban boards, and these cards should have never existed in the first place, most of them. So most of that can be taken care of by the proper design of the board that represents the actual activities in your workflow, and a lot of task cards can be represented by simple explicit work agreements, simple checklists. What does it mean we completed business analysis, or what does it mean code complete, what does it mean we're ready for deployment, and so on and so forth. And that makes managing a lot of dependent tasks simpler. So I wanted to bring this up because I believe this isn't really on the mind of a lot of people. In typical situations, someone is presenting a case study in the webinar, uses the word dependency, and people in the audience need to think what that means, and it usually doesn't mean this. Yet this is a very real problem in the workplace. All right, next, and we still have some time today to talk about other things. I want to talk about a somewhat different kind of dependency. And now this isn't a dependency between work items or tasks. It's dependency between services, except that we usually don't see them as services. So let's remember one of the previous episodes where I showed you how you can map a process, and I use this particular non-IT process as an example. So in this particular process, a group of training course designers produces a new course. So they go through several activities such as fact-finding, instructional design, drafting, beta testing, and publishing. And I use this very simple graphical notation as the figures in this diagram of various sizes and colors represent some kind of collaboration pattern. Different color usually means it's a different team or a department of the company that gets involved. And so what we can tell from this diagram, actually most of the work happens within this training team. The yellow figure represents one or more members of the training department. Yet, in 3 of these 5 activities, the training team has dependencies on other parts of the company. So the collaboration pattern in that particular activity involves a lot of outsiders. So the way we can choose to look at this is that the training department delivers a service, and that service includes deliverables such as new courses, updates to existing courses, and it also includes actual course deliveries when one of the trainers standing in front of their audience, or maybe virtually, because a lot of it happens over, let's say, Zoom right now. Nowadays, it teaches the actual class. So creating a new course, updating an existing course, which may follow a similar process, is one of the work item types in that service delivery. And we can also choose to view the professional services of others, such as, let's say, field engineers contributing, let's say, to some fact finding as part of creating a new course. Just for the context, the course is basically for super users of a certain high-tech company's very complicated products. And of course, knowledge of field engineers, how they actually use the product in the field, is very useful for the training course designers. So every time we have, let's say, a dependency, we need some kind of fact, and we don't have access to it, and we don't have access to the person carrying that knowledge because, well, they are a field engineer, they're somewhere in the field. We can visualize it on a visual board of this training group as a blocked ticket. So let's say if they have a blocked card on their board, representing this training course update, they can block it with, let's say, a blocker marker and saying this is blocked because this field engineer isn't available. However, we can choose to view the field engineer's expertise as a service too. And that service has, several work item types. Well, probably the most prevalent work item type is actually to do their work in the field, which is to install and maintain various pieces of equipment which are made and sold by this company. But there is at least another kind of a secondary work item type for the field engineering service, which is basically for others to come in and pick their brain about how the product is actually working in the field, and how people use it. And that can amount to some number of requests, and it can take some real time to do, and could take a chunk of capacity of the field engineering group. And that is a service too. And we, in this case, we can say that one service here, which is this training course production, depends on the professional service provided by the field engineering group. So when we design the Kanban board for the field engineering group, it will have work items generated by blockers occurring here. So it is essential to managing dependencies between two services is to, first of all, we need to see both of them as a professional service based on some type of expertise, and one service has expertise that the other one doesn't. We can visualize using a blocker every instance when one service is blocked because it needs access to the expertise of another service and it isn't available immediately. And for this matching blocker, there is a matching work item on the other service's board, which just basically says, we were just asked about this, we can help. This is going to take us some time, but we will get back to them and we will provide our knowledge that will be used to deliver some other service. So this is kind of the essential components of seeing dependencies between services. So once again, choosing to see them as services, and then understanding exactly the moments when the two connect, and visualizing them using a blocker on one services board and a work item on another services board. And in a similar fashion, I just for those in who are in information technology or software development, well, we can have so it is a sketch of a process that may be more familiar to you, with so certain names attached to, let's say, various phases of this process. Again, in activities such as, let's say, code construction, we may be dependent on some external team's expertise. Maybe actually code construction may involve some component, some product component that one particular team has a lot of knowledge about, and let's say our team doesn't. So we have a dependency on that other team. And in this case, again, we can visualize it as a blocker, but that other team that presumably owns this component can expect some amount of demand for their expertise, and so that would basically be a type of work item, a recurring work item on their board when various other teams ask for their expertise, for their help, maybe lend a team member for a day or so to help do some work that involves that particular product component. And so on and so forth. And in, let's say, the testing phase, we can similarly incur dependency on expertise of people such as, let's say, performance testing or usability testing, compliance with various important regulations, let's say, on the privacy of user data, and so on and so forth. And of course, a very common pattern that happens in deployment of software and IT solutions, that we have multiple teams actually producing new features and updates to the systems. But when those have to be deployed, we need to go, these teams need to go to a specialized group that actually provides the deployment service and manages all the necessary staging, pre-production, and production environments. So again, in that pattern, we can again recognize we have multiple services, recognize the connection points between them, and model those connections using blockers and the matching work items on the other service. And I would like to kind of conclude the conversation, or rather my one-sided speech about that second type of dependency between services, with a very simple trick. And this is a very simple calculation that one can do when planning some kind of project or a major, let's say, product feature or version of a product. But not a lot of people do this. And it goes like this. So let's say we have 10 teams in our company, and they're producing new features for a product. How many features they're going to produce in the next year? Okay, well, let's say maybe 300, right? So let's say on average 30 work items going across each of these teams' Kanban boards, all the way left to right, 300 total over a period of time for all 10 teams. How many of these work items will get blocked at certain stages of the process? Well, we don't know which ones will get blocked, but we can have a reasonable guess about the probability of that happening. Let's say in during the development phase, let's say 20% of the work items will encounter dependency on some group of experts that are outside the team doing the development. They will need help with something that requires external expertise. 20. Well, that means that group of experts is going to get 60 work items. 300 times 20%, 60. 60 work items will have to go left to right on their Kanban boards. Now, 60 work items, that's a certain amount of workload. Do they have capacity for that? Can we plan this capacity ahead of time instead of just dealing with it just in case, just in time when the first of these blockers starts happening, or when we start seeing, okay, well, it's a system, right? It isn't just a one-off blocker. They just simply keep coming. If, let's say, these 10 teams are going to deploy their 300 features to a production environment, they're going to need help from some deployment specialists, and for the service of those deployment specialists, it will be 300 work items, right? So, do they have enough capacity to handle that? Can they deliver this kind of throughput, 300 let's say deployed change requests over a period of time with, let's say, with consistent quality and taking a reasonable time that basically matches the fitness criteria that these 10 teams have. So it's a very simple calculation. If we have a service that we believe will produce a certain number of work items per unit of time, whatever we use in our planning, we can multiply that by the probability of incurring dependency. And that probability can be sometimes 20%, sometimes 5%, sometimes 10%. It depends on what kind of dependency that is on some external group. We can basically plan and anticipate the amount of workload on those other groups. And that can help us a lot in planning. So again, we don't plan exactly when these blockers will occur or specific work items that will get blocked, but we can actually estimate simply the quantity of those blockers and work items on other services boards. And that can help us plan staff and fund them appropriately so that those services deliver the throughput that's expected of them. All right, so these were two types of situations I wanted to talk about today. Both fit the theme of dependencies. I spoke for about 33 minutes on that. And this is it for this week. Folks, next week I will be on vacation, so I'll skip next Friday, and instead we'll do another episode on Friday, April 11th. And I will announce the topic sometime this weekend. So maybe we'll continue with the topic of dependencies, or maybe talk about something else. Feel free to make any suggestions, and I'll see you then. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and kind of keeping in touch. Goodbye.